The last Redcoat leaves New York City. On this day in history, November 25th, 1783, nearly 3 months after the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which ended the American Revolution, the last British soldiers finally withdrew from New York City, signaling that America was finally independent. Known as Evacuation Day, New York City had been under British control since its capture in September of 1776. When they finally left, U.S. General George Washington entered the city in triumph with the cheers of New Yorkers lining the streets to celebrate. In mid-August, the last British commander stationed in the U.S., Sir Guy Carleton, was given the order from his superiors in London to evacuate New York. He notified the President of the Confederation Congress about his plans, but informed him that there would be no timeline, as a large number of refugees, formerly enslaved people, and military personnel were present. By the time evacuation began, around 60,000 British loyalists resided in NYC, 4,000 of whom were free or enslaved black people. When the Treaty of Paris was being negotiated, the Americans included a clause that required the British to return all fugitive slaves to their American enslavers. Despite this addendum, Sir Carleton insisted that the clause did not apply to the enslaved people whose freedom had been promised by the British. When he and Washington eventually met, General Washington inquired about his property, hoping that the British had kept a lookout for some of his slaves who had escaped during the war. Carleton stood his ground and stated that depriving enslaved people who had been promised freedom would be a dishonorable violation of the public faith, a response that surprised Washington. Not too long after, British ships began sailing out of New York Harbor, carrying tens of thousands of British and freed slaves as they made their way back to their homeland. For years after, the decision to evacuate the freed slaves and not provide compensation to their American enslavers remained a high point of tension for American-English relations. Finally, at noon on November 25, 1783, the last evacuation occurred and American troops secured the city under the command of General Henry Knox. Entry to the city, however, was stalled until the last remaining Union flag was removed. Nailed to a flagpole at Fort George, the pole was greased as a final act of defiance, but the Americans were not going to go so far as to give up at the final hurdle. John Van Arsdale, a Revolutionary War veteran, allegedly scaled the pole, removed the flag, and replaced it with the iconic stars and stripes before the British were even out of sight, giving New Yorkers and Americans an entrance symbolizing that the United States was born. If you've learned something, consider dropping a like and subscribing to my channel. Your support would mean the world to me.